Hi everyone. Today I've got two absolute awesome bomb people here with me today. Susan Eldridge and Ingrid Martin. Hey girls.
Hi,
Hey,
Sarah.
I want this chat to be called Where Are All the Girls? Is that all right with you?
Sounds good.
sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so the point is we're girls and we're relatively successful in this world, this classical music world. And I want to know how we did it since apparently girls get no chances to do anything and we get, stopped all the time. So I wanted to talk to two powerhouses about this phenomenon where actually it is true. A lot of girls do get stopped from a very young age from doing all sorts of things like playing on the monkey bars or running too fast or being too loud or too obnoxious or too angry. So let's talk about all of this stuff in relation to classical music. So girls, your powerhouses, let's see. I'll stop talking in a sec, I promise. This is all about you guys. You've created these organisations which are incredible. One's called Notable Values, Conducting Artistry, Victorian Youth Symphony, which I've worked with a lot, and Ignite Lab. So what? Why? Why do you feel like you need to change the world? Go, Ingrid. You first.
Um, well, I guess one of the things that I am passionate about changing in the world is the way that young people in particular experience music, particularly in their schools and in their communities. And I, as a young conductor, grew up working in the community and education space and loved working with young people and helping them really connect emotionally with the music that they're playing and being able to feel like they're actually expressing something rather than just operating a piece of machinery to make it match the dots that are in front of them. And I was really excited about giving my students that experience and realized that the way to give more students that experience is to enable other conductors in schools and community ensembles to also approach music in that way. So conducting artistry is all about empowering conductors and giving them more skills and more techniques to be able to help them and their students connect more personally and in a more human way with the music that they make.
And on the topic of girls, would you say there are more girls conducting at for want of a better word, a lower level than what you see happening at the top, like at the international conducting level? Would you say that girls have more of a presence in schools? They have more of a leadership presence in schools and high schools and even universities. But once it gets to the top of the pyramid, there's less girls. That's what I've noticed. Would you say that's pretty right?
Well, maybe we could call it, working in a different context rather than in a lower
I know,
um,
I'm sorry. I regret
capacity.
it. I regret
But
it.
we know about education that education is traditionally a female dominated profession. So it's certainly true that there are a lot more women conducting in schools and also in community ensembles, but maybe a little bit less in that context. When you move into a university tertiary space, I think that gender balance certainly starts to sway more in the favour of men. And then obviously when you're looking in the professional, say, orchestral context, there are far more men on the podium than there are women. So those balances tend to change.
What do you put it down to?
I think there are probably a lot of factors and it's pretty complex. I think one of the things that I've noticed is that, unless you're someone, and this goes for really probably any classical musician in a way, unless you're sort of identified as a prodigy at a very young age and that you're sort of skyrocketed to some kind of international career, that particularly for conducting, a lot of those opportunities and a lot of the respect that people get within the profession is actually quite ageist. And it's really something that is reserved for people that are sort of, over 40 or even over 50. And I think that to kind of continue to get to that point in your profession as a female conductor requires a lot of sacrifice, a lot of work for not very much money, as it would be for a male. And kind of scratching around for opportunities, or having, opportunities that are very few and far between when you're starting that path to working with, say, professional orchestras. And, if you're someone that also wants to invest in having a family, you can't really live off that kind of income and that kind of financial structure in your life. So at some point, people are going to have to make a decision, unless they've got, a partner in their life that can financially support a family and financially support them to go off and do the bits and pieces that come along in those early parts of people's career. I think that's probably one of the reasons, is just, as we see in many professions, that balance between family and career. And I think another thing, as we've just mentioned, there are far less women conducting professional orchestras currently than there are men. And I think there is this sense of being able to see yourself in that position.
Absolutely.
And if you don't see a role model, then how are you going to think I can do that?
Yeah, that's right. Self-esteem plays a big role. And if I can turn to you, Susan, I met you when we were doing our masters together at university. And it was just so great to be able to talk to you. And you were really open about the problems you faced in the classical world as a performer. You play French horn, and self-esteem seemed to be something that was, at that time, just slightly out of reach for you. And you wouldn't know that now. Look at you. You're just absolutely amazing, powerhouse. Tell us about that fight that you had to wage. And it was possibly a fight within yourself as well as a fight with the outside world, to gain some self-esteem, which society doesn't automatically give to girls. Girls are all like, oh, be careful, don't do that, don't take risks, it's probably your fault, it's not the problem's fault, So tell us about that journey for you, so that we can carry on from what Ingrid was saying. It's very complicated why there's more boys up there than girls, but self-esteem plays a massive role. Tell us your version of that.
Yeah, it's a great point, Sarah. And I think, coming on from what Ingrid was saying about the systemic issues, I suspect part of the complicated mix of the women on the podium is that if you've had enough privilege to get through to study music at a tertiary level, you've come from a very good school, probably, that had a music program, you had parents who had capacity, you've come from a school that probably valued compliance and achievement, that really talked about good students. And so we end up, and I know because I've been teaching at a tertiary level for a few years, the result of all of that ends up with a lot of young women in the tertiary sector behaving very well, pleasing the teacher. And anything that would be a challenge to the system is just not in their DNA. They've never seen anybody do that. So I think a lot of it's got to do with the education system implicitly putting these expectations on girls to be a good student, achieve and behave, and also their ability, so then they live in this world of measurement. So if I do, if I regurgitate what's been thrown down my throat at school, I'll get a good mark. And so they live in this world of measurement where I've got to do the right thing to get a good mark at school. All these kind of, the progression is about being measured, and anything that's about actually where does my value sit in that, and building their resilience to failure doesn't really happen. And so that's, I think they're very, having worked with this sort of like under 35 right down to high school level musicians, is there, and particularly because the music we play is about compliant replication primarily. I've asked Ingrid a lot about this, about, well, what would happen if you took the Dvorak at 76 instead of 82? And she's like, oh, you can't do that. And I'm like, why not? The man's dead. You're not going to get any hate about it. So it's about this replication without questioning. And also the education model, if you've come through a good school that has a good music program and you've done the youth orchestra, you've sat there and been told what to do for a decade. So you've had the decision-making muscle. You've got no ability to practice that. Everyone else has all of the power. So when their ability to look at risk and tolerate risk and discomfort is really, really low. And if you want to be one of a few people leading, you've got to have some skin in the game to take, as you have had plenty of that. We've all had plenty of that. And the first time they hit that barrier, it's really challenging for them because they haven't had the experience of doing that before.
Yes, and they don't necessarily have family or society behind them to just get back up on the horse. So is this what happened to you? Did you have a kind of well-mannered upbringing that you've just completely busted out of in recent years? I did ask you about so...
Oh no, well actually, because we're talking about the issue of gender, but I think if we were going to talk about like where people have experienced discrimination or judgment, or for me, that's actually been on a musical level, because I come from a community music making background. I didn't come through formal music education. I'm first in my family to go to university. All of these things, and what I found when I got into the tertiary system was a complete lack of understanding of the value that I brought, having had this community music making background, rather than that I'd sat in the back row of XYZ youth orchestra and been very compliant. Because I'd grown up in a model of, well, if I don't put the chairs out, we have nothing to sit on. And my mum's running the photocopier, and like Dad's running the bar because that pays for the music hire, and my sister's kind of, I come from a way of making music that was for people by people, and what I found being judged and there was no way, there's no way in the tertiary music system of the value of who that makes people being acknowledged, and also saying, okay, so maybe you might not aspire to have a job in an orchestra. That's okay. Where might you see your music making taking you? So circling back to the question you asked, Ingrid, at the very beginning, is my purpose is to help people understand that musician does not equal paid to play. Musician equals excellent human with a fantastic set of training and skills that they can apply creatively to anything that they seek to do. So that's what I didn't have in the beginning, was models of what I might be able to do with the talent and the expertise that I had, because it wasn't top level playing the French horn in the School of Music. So yeah, more for me, not about gender, but more about being different for another set of reasons.
Yeah, okay, so that's really interesting. So self-esteem that we were just talking about, sometimes you might not get a chance, not because you're female, but because you're just a different kind of person that's unfamiliar. And we're often told, very, very strongly now by certain groups of people that girls are discriminated against and girls don't get these chances. But how much of it is, shouldn't we, now that we have the freedom to pretty much do whatever we want, shouldn't we just create our own environment where we can be leaders? Because, the old school, it is changing, but it's a little bit too slow for girls. Girls get a lot of things done in a short period of time because they have to. And so that's why I look at you two and I think, yeah, you've just basically done that. You haven't waited by the phone. Why isn't so-and-so ringing me to conduct their orchestra? Why doesn't the university have this really great organization, this thing to help students out of their ruts, and what are they going to do with their lives? So you guys have just, you girls, gendered language. You girls have just gone, you know what, this needs to happen and we're going to do it. So my next question is, even if you don't get society's support, where do you get the financial support? How do you do it? Do you put your own money in? I mean, what happened? Let's talk about Victorian Youth Symphony. Where does the money come from for that? Because that's not free,
True. So just before we talk about money, I think it's worth touching on this idea of there are lots of ways in which everyone is different, and that there are lots of different ways in which people could feel kind of marginalized or discriminated against. And I think that that's different in every industry, every profession. Like I think there would be people in this country that would feel like, as a classical musician, because they are Australian, they are discriminated against.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they are not from Europe or from America or from, the like holy tradition of like European Western art music and that enclave of, well, you haven't done your whatever
In
master
Berlin.
classes
In Berlin,
graduate study in Berlin, so you
Totally.
don't count as a musician. You're not good enough.
Yeah.
That's certainly a prevailing attitude across classical music in Australia that hopefully is changing. But I mean, what that means is that lots of people don't feel that the experience they have had here is valued.
Yep.
So it's coming back to this idea of, we're not valuing people for who they are and what they can bring in the moment.
Yep.
And that makes people feel less than. And that really erodes that sense of self-esteem and that sense of, I can do something for myself. And so what you've described, with us, with some of the things that we've done is, we've looked at those systems or particular kind of micro cultures, wherever they might be, and realized, okay, well, we're not going to be valued for whatever reason, which is beyond our control. We can't control what those other people value, but what we can control is what we step up and decide to do for ourselves. So we're kind of bypassing those things.
Yep.
And maybe later that means that someone in those cultures turns around and goes, oh, look at what they're doing, that's
Absolutely.
cool, maybe I should go and do that.
Yeah.
But if we just, as you say, keep waiting for the phone to ring or keep kind of knocking on the door, that's again putting us in a really disempowered
Absolutely.
position.
It's 100% animal politics. If you stand up straighter than the other group, then you'll be noticed. It's as simple as that. You cannot wait. You're a victim if you're waiting, just go and do it. So you must answer the question though. It takes
So
self-esteem.
the orchestra and the money.
It takes self-esteem to ask for money too. So it for me, it all comes back to self-esteem. How difficult has it been for you to stand up really straight and say, this orchestra needs money? I don't even know how you guys run it, but explain.
So when I came to the orchestra, which was in 2015, like just about every single other community or youth orchestra, kind of small, self-run, self-managed organisation, it was really the only source of income was ticket sales from performances and player subscriptions. And that model is, again, pretty much what every community music organisation operates on. And it really poses a lot of limitations for what those organisations can do. And so when,
like what? Let's talk about what those limitations are. Would music hire be one of those, or
music hire? Definitely. So and that comes back to there was a fabulous panel run earlier this week for International Women's Day by the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, and there was a lot of discussion about female composers. And one of the challenges is that most of our female composers who, for example, have written for orchestra, pieces that our youth orchestra could play, are contemporary and therefore in copyright, and therefore the music costs quite a lot of money, as it should do, because the composers should be remunerated for their work. For the people who are listening who might not know, it would not be uncommon for one piece of music that might go for 5 to 10 minutes to cost $500 to $700 for one performance to hire for a symphony orchestra. So if you've got X number of people in the audience who are paying like $25 a ticket, you can do the maths of, once you take away the fee for hiring the rehearsal venue, the public liability insurance, the fee for hiring the concert venue, the fee for paying the conductor, the fee for paying fabulous tutors like yourself to come and work with the orchestra, that suddenly, certain expenses have to either be squeezed or minimized. And music hire is certainly one of the things that tends to be first to go. And so that's why when you go and look at what is being programmed by community orchestras or schools who also have really limited budgets for these things, that you see the music of the dead white male composers because they're on IMSLP and you can print it out for 5 cents a page. So, that's a massive barrier to, again, even these organizations also doing their part to, represent diversity and contemporary voices.
Completely awesome point. That's right. So how do you overcome this? Because your programming is absolutely sensational and not necessarily always old, dead white males.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So what happened was a couple of years or a year or so after I started with the orchestra, we engaged Susan to help us apply for a City of Melbourne grant, and we were lucky enough to get triennial funding, so 3 years of funding from the City of Melbourne. It was a huge amount of money, more than the orchestra's entire budget for probably a couple of years for each year, and that meant that we were able to do some really fantastic, adventurous, artistic things. And that funding finished at the end of last year, and so now we're in an interesting position of, particularly in this twilight zone. I don't know if we can say post-COVID just yet, but that weird zone of trying to work out how do we continue to be a leader in the space and continue to do things that are interesting and innovative, whilst also balancing the books, which is quite a challenge. And I spent weeks trying to program this year's season with a budget for sheet music which was an absolute fraction of the amount of money that I had been working with in the past. Luckily, part of our City of Melbourne funding was to commission for local composers, and obviously we didn't get to perform those works last year, so all of those works are going to be performed this year, so that's sort of helping us bulk out, but it's going to be a challenge moving forward. Without this external funding. It's forcing me to flex my creative muscles as far as they will be flexed.
Yeah, so look, I knew this would happen in this conversation. We're trying to say how girls maybe don't get as much chance, and we get sidetracked by all the incredibly amazing things that you girls are doing. So this is really positive. I mean, this is what I wanted. My whole point of this was, instead of saying that we're victims and all these terrible stories have happened to us, like I've got my notes here, like this is what I do every time. I've got my notes and I'm trying to work in some sad stories or some terrifying things that have happened to you both, and it's just, you're just leaving all that, if any of that has happened to you, you're just leaving it all behind because there's too much to look forward to. Once you've discovered your power, you use it, and you girls are using it for good. So I want to just touch on Ignite Lab, which Susan, you founded, and I thought that was a really interesting initiative and something the uni probably hadn't seen before. Can you describe Ignite Lab and why you felt the need for it?
Yes, I will, and I'll be succinct in that. But before I do that, just touch on but coming back to your point about not getting sidetracked about the self-esteem, right? Which is why we're trying to unpack is this trope of where are all the women true or not? That's really why we're talking, right? Is that you asked me about when we met a few years ago and self-esteem, and I was in a bit of a hole, and this magnificent human came into my life, and that changed, and like held up a mirror that I couldn't see for myself. And then I started trying to surround myself with people who could see what I did have to bring. And I think I was listening again, we were listening this morning to this wonderful conversation with Deborah Cheatham from the panel, speaking with such grace and power and talking about finding your tribe and how she had one music teacher who believed in her and really nobody else. And I think so this issue of self-esteem, it's choosing to surround yourself with people who can reflect your magnificence and support you when we all fall over. And when we're all crying in our basement, like was August of last year, to recently. So, it doesn't always need to come from within. It can also come from building a small circle of trust that may or may not be in classical music. Maybe it's your geography teacher, maybe it's grandma. But building a support network and a tribe that believe in you and are with you on the journey is really, really critical.
Beautiful, like an extended family.
Extended family,
I was just talking to a friend who happens to also be a musician yesterday, who's in the States, and we were just talking about who are the people that we have in our lives that we can feel like we can just be ourselves that we're not, and he used the word pretzeling ourselves to try and like, fit into someone else's need or to impress someone or whatever it is. And, I think even if you've got one person that you don't have to pretzel for, then that's the start of that. Because as Susan said, we all have downtimes. And, for people listening who are in, every industry has been affected by the pandemic, some a lot more than others. And, lots of us have had challenges in the last kind of 12 months or so. And we have times when we don't feel like we've got it. We don't feel like we've got that self-esteem, don't feel like you've got anything left. And if you've got at least one person in your life, again, doesn't have to be anything to do with your profession, that you feel like you can at least open up to and be honest about that. I think when we're in those, bottom of the barrel times, being able to talk about it openly and honestly and not hide it is really important, because that's what's going to help us get through it. So much of these, emotions and challenges, we just have to acknowledge and accept that that's what's going on at that time and that it will pass.
Yeah, absolutely. So Susan, you weren't in that situation when I met you. You were feeling a little bit more alone than what Ingrid's describing.
Yeah, so it might help to give it a tiny bit of context. As I said, I grew up in a community music making background. And Sarah, you said we met when we were doing our masters, but we actually did our undergraduate degrees together in Queensland. You were this like superstar, and I was this like dorky country kid.
I was awful back then. I'm so sorry if I came across terrible. I was awful back then.
No. But so my place in tertiary, the experience that I had in tertiary, I was first in family, so I didn't have anyone who knew what really study meant. So the preparation, I came from a really quite small town. I played the euphonium in the brass band. So I didn't really fit in what I bought, they didn't value. It wasn't one of the boxes that ever got ticked. So I didn't have a very good experience, and I left. And then I did other things, and I decided to come back. I hadn't played the horn for a decade and a half. And when I came back in, the reason I came back into the sector was I wanted to write a different story that wasn't "you have no value" to us, which is what I'd been told, what had been presented in the papers that you get, the numbers that you get judged on. So I'm someone in life, if I've got something I want to challenge or fix, I'll take the fastest but the hardest option. That's my MO. So I decided to jump back into tertiary as a mature age student and see, could I have a different experience that wasn't about being told by 3 people on a panel that I had no value. And so when I got straight back in there, I was like, oh, this is not very good. It could be 1827. Like, this is just, it's just not good enough. And my concern was always about the student experience, about them being led to believe there's a fairy tale of a paid playing job for all of them, that if they don't achieve that, then you're cannon fodder, like you're one of the unspoken, you're one of the unmentionables. Because that had been me. I'd been one of the 99% of the unmentionables, never heard from again. I've never appeared in the alumni newsletter of my school, despite having built a multi-million-dollar business in Europe. Like, they're never going to feature me as a graduate champion of the School of Music, are they? So I just was really furious about all of that, and also feeling that what I had to bring and what I had to give and offer had no place in that. So I just was like, it's not okay. And I built a business case for what a program, best practice program could look like. And with heart in my mouth, like just hammered down the door of the director and said, look, it's not good enough. And I think coming from, at that point, I had fairly young children. And so I was thinking about, what would it be like for my kids to be students in this School of Music? And like, I would be freaking furious if this BS was being told to my kids, if they were allowed to believe that the only way that success to play the violin is to be a concert soloist. That's garbage. And so it came from like the maternal instinct of me of thinking about how would I feel if I was the parent of a student and as a current student. So I presented the business case and they said, if you can find the money, you can make it happen. So I'm pretty handy at that. So I raised, it was almost $500,000 eventually outside the School of Music to make that program run. And yeah, we're just really, I was just furious, Sarah, that it's not good enough for the people in the system. And that's the way I feel also generally about any of the structures or the organizations within classical music in Australia. Very few of them, I hear stories of people saying, I love my job. I love my work. I feel valued. I love the contribution that we're making. Overwhelmingly, the story is,
and I love the other people in my organization. I love my colleagues.
Yeah. There's just lots of complaining about that it's other people's fault, and feeling under just a real disconnect between what is the purpose, why are we doing anything and who is it for, and the stuff they have to do every day. So so I just I was really mad that it wasn't good enough. And also
so you basically just had a tantrum, basically.
An internal tantrum, not an external tantrum.
Well, you had a tantrum that manifested into a really valuable program that what does the program look like? What does a student do when they enter into this program?
Yeah. So there's three. I'm not involved in the program anymore.
But you started it, so that doesn't matter.
Yeah, I started it because, and that's another story. Is working in a system that I didn't feel valued. I couldn't continue to do that, so I chose to leave. So, I had basically a full-time job ongoing in a university, which as a musician is pretty good, but it was making me deeply unhappy.
Look, you just basically have to be your own boss. Let's just face it here. You just if I was to be a bit naughty, you sound a bit like a guy. You just can't work with other people. You just have to be your own boss. You're not community minded at all. You just want to be the boss, and that's fine because when you're the boss, things go really well. And that's not just a guy thing. That's any great leader, girl, boy, anyone. If things go better when you're actually the boss, people sense it and they give you the power to do it. And then you can use your power for good or evil, but you do need to have the power. So girls have to stand up and say, you know what? I can be a good boss. I won't be mean. I won't be nasty. I won't have tantrums. I know what has to be done, in what order it has to be done. And if it's done like this, everyone will benefit from it, So,
just on
Ingrid.
That, when you said, I don't have to be mean, I don't have to be nasty, I don't have to have tantrums, I think that idea is really connected to this thing we were talking about before of this compliance and be a good girl and, don't rock the boat. If you speak up, you're bossy, all of those sort of stereotypes, I guess, that we've heard of, particularly in recent years, that for me, as a conductor, someone who's leading a group of people in an orchestra, we're playing music that expresses the entire range of human emotions. And some of that is composers having a tantrum, or being really angry, or,
or wanting to make out with someone else's wife. I mean, most of this music in the Romantic period was the yearning for someone else's wife, let's face it.
Lots of shagging going on in the music. Don't tell it to the school students, but, once you get past that, it's all right. So that, all musicians, not just a conductor, but we have to feel free, but maybe more than free, emboldened to feel like we can express all of those things within the music. And that was something that really only in the last 12 months was made apparent to me by a fabulous teacher, Ben Zander. He said, you're not connecting with that. You're not willing to show that to other people. You're afraid to be angry in front of other people. You're afraid to get up and, wave your fist around at people and express the true depth of frustration and anger that is in this Beethoven piece of music. And until you feel able to do that, you're not going to be able to effectively conduct this music.
Can we talk about this? Actually, can I just interrupt? Don't forget what you're going to say. I have an absolutely, completely opposite take on this. And it's really interesting that you've been given this advice which has deeply affected you and probably will change your life and probably will make you a better conductor and more connected to the music. But I have a lot of students, a lot of girl students, who find it really difficult to connect to these emotions that primarily men have had in the romantic period. It's not much to do with our lives right now. It's a completely different time. So the way I get around it is I say, and I look at your bookshelf behind you, you read a lot. You know the history of Beethoven and Brahms and all those dudes. You know it all. So it's easy for you to say, well, I just need to connect to the emotion of it. But you have the background of the history. You have the technical knowledge that a lot of these kids don't have. So unless you have the technical knowledge, the historical, political, gender, imagination to connect with what these people must have been going through, that comes from study and research. That's an incredibly technical activity. You guys have done that, girls. You girls have done that. And then you can let all that go and say, yeah, I've just got to connect to the emotion, which is actually what actors have to do. Actors haven't experienced it. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yes, what he says is great. But at the same time, if you don't have that education, which goes back to the first book you read about Chopin, you know, you have to know what kind of a person that was. You have to know what was happening politically around that time. And if you don't, it doesn't matter how angry you feel, you won't have a true connection to it. So it has to incorporate proper study because it is a technical exercise. And I love how you girls get really emotional about, oh, we've got to connect to the deepest part of our soul. And yes, I agree with that. But if there's nothing up here to back it up, then you're just having a tantrum for no reason. And that's not that authentic either. So yes, I agree with him. But at the same time, if you spread that, then it means that anyone can do anything without proper study. And then our quest for proper education in the earlier grades in primary schools, music just must be magic, because all we have to do is think of the emotion of it. And then the government goes, oh, well, it's just for magical people, you know, it's not got nothing to do with primary school. So I know this has nothing to do with gender, but I'm sorry to interrupt. I just needed to say that.
So it's interesting you say that, because I completely agree with we can't let ourselves off the hook of doing the work. 100% completely agree. You know, knowing, well, what is this piece of music? What was happening when this was going on? Who is this composer? What is this person trying to say? That's our responsibility as artists in any genre, you know, and we happen to be performative artists just in the way as actors are. We're taking a text and we are trying to create a new version of that text. And you know, we could talk for hours about the spectrum of interpretation of what we could consciously and intentionally choose to do or not do with that knowledge of that text. You know, we could say, I've got all the knowledge and I'm deliberately throwing it out the window, or I'm going to do something completely way out and crazy, or I've got all the knowledge and, you know, I'm going to be very reverent. And, you know, we could go from historically informed performance and, you know, the whole bit. But what I see in music education, as not everywhere, but as certainly the majority, is that music has been turned into something that is purely technical and mechanical. And what I see happening for students in schools and people in community music and you know, youth orchestras and those kind of things is that it has lost that humanness. It's about your A is sharp or flat, and you are wrong if that A is not in tune.
Yeah, it's
or
completely true.
It was too short or too long. You weren't in time with those other people.
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do with this is a message that Katie Abbott wrote, or this is a message that Melody Ertvos is trying to communicate in this music. It's about dots of ink on a page, and there's no recognition that a human put those dots there, and that is someone trying to say something. And so for me, in what I'm doing, there's plenty of other people that are really good at teaching people how to do the technical stuff, and I can do that too. I can teach you all the things you can do with your conducting to not make your ensemble slow down, to make them play together, to make their staccato shorter, whatever that may be. But to me, all those technical things are in service of that musical message. And it's, to me, it's a musical message that is so often missing, because that's what we're trying to give to an audience.
So do you think that because we're not men, this is going to come across like a dumb question, worded very badly, but the idea that we need to connect to the deeper human intention, you said human a lot, which is great, because maybe what we should be doing instead of focusing on gender difference is to focus on the connection that all humans have together. And the fact that only men got the opportunity to do it, there are so many different reasons for that, and some of them are quite benign reasons. We've got an opportunity now. So let's talk about now. What do we do if we see some political commentary saying that all girls are victims and they're all, like, what do we do? Can we set a better example? Can we have a better conversation about it? Let's talk about what the conversation should look like in terms of gender equality.
I think the way that I teach, and like even last night I was running a session for the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester on Zoom, and they were pitching these these Masters of Music students were pitching their projects, and what I got was lots of fact regurgitation, but firstly a very little human connection, and also very little understanding of those students stepping forward to be present in themselves. They were trying to be good students and please the teacher. And so I had a lot of, rather than digging into them about the fact that their budgets were pretty terrible, I was just kept saying to them, what I wanted to see was much more of you. I wanted a sense that you knew who you were, that you understand the value that you bring to bringing this project to life, and that you could articulate that through your physicality and through your words and through like sparkly eyes and stuff. And so I think, maybe for all of us who teach, and everybody teaches something in some way, because sharing, anything that you do that has meaning is kind of teaching, is creating a learning environment that allows the student to discover, or whoever is to discover their value, and be able to articulate that value with confidence, because that's what we are able to do. And we've both had an experience of feeling not seen by the professional end of town, and not valued for what we bring. And the choice we had was, do we choose to double down on that narrative and say it's their fault, they don't know what I could do, or to say, well, maybe they don't know what I could do, so how do I take responsibility for articulating what I can do, and then they can make the choice for themselves if the fit is right. So I think that all of us taking responsibility to work with our students or our colleagues and help them say, do you understand where your value is? Can you speak that with confidence and truth? And what are you in control of? What are you not in control of? So that, for me, I feels better for me as a way forward that isn't putting blame.
Yeah, beautiful.
That's a big thing for me.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Because you're always connected to the alleged perpetrator when you're constantly blaming, and there's this big chain that connects you to all these perceived hindrances to your life, and they might be real. But as long as you're chained to them, then they have all that control over you. Sometimes all you need to do is just turn your back on it. It's as simple as that, conceptualizing, just turning your back on it, going a totally different direction, which is luxurious for people. I know some people are stuck, but
what we've also, I think what we have both also experienced in this last 12 months is we are making lots of assumptions about other people. So we're assuming that we're not getting chosen for things because, X, Y, Z, instead of this. So we're in the same way that we're like, don't judge us because we're women or it's not fair. We've kind of been overlaying that judgment, or I know I have been, on other people, instead of being able to say, I want to start it from this position of they're doing the best they can with the knowledge and the skills they've got right now. can I be a resource to them to help them be more skilled and more knowledgeable so they can make the right decision for them? But it's been a lot about kind of letting other people have the power.
Yeah, yep.
And wanting to put blame or wanting to put responsibility away from you.
Yeah,
yourself.
that's right.
Yeah.
And
I've spoken too long.
No, but just before we hear from Ingrid about that, one of the big things I tell my students is don't be deluded, because even if you're playing at your best, there's probably 10,000 people in the vicinity who are also playing at that level. So don't be deluded. Don't keep yourself at this level, and don't assume, like you say, don't assume that you're not getting those jobs because they are doing this or they are doing that. What do they want from me? Well, I tell you, I am the they when I'm on a panel, and I'll tell you what I want. I want you to have a basic standard of in tune and in time. I'm so sorry, Ingrid, but you know, the basics aren't there.
Sure, yeah.
And then
basics are important.
And then you have to have that next level up too. So don't stop, don't start blaming anyone else until you've done everything you can to get to that basic level. Because it's like a subconscious excuse to let yourself fail, make yourself feel better by blaming other people that you've failed. So failure is a really interesting one.
And do you think, Sarah, also that comes back to the education system, particularly with large ensembles, is you've had no personal responsibility, really.
Yeah, the ensemble phenomenon is such a great learning environment, but you can coast, especially string players. String players do a lot of coasting. Yeah, you know, you see them. You sit up the back in all your bars rest going, those people aren't playing all the notes. There are some people at work who think I'm an absolute genius. They think I'm getting every note. It's because I basically ghost half of them in the rehearsal process, and I just get the bowing right. And they think I'm playing all the notes. And they're like, oh, you are amazing. It's like, honey, I'm not playing half of those notes just yet, you know? So Ingrid, how do we have a better conversation about this? What ideas have you had in the meantime when Susan and I were rambling?
Well, I think what I really have enjoyed about this conversation, and I really enjoyed about the MSO conversation as well, and maybe we can have a link to that as well. It's on YouTube.
We definitely should. Yep.
Is it's been a great balance, I think, of addressing, and this is what the conversation needs to be moving forward, is acknowledging and addressing the challenges that are real, acknowledging that everyone has a different experience and everyone has a different perception of how that, you know, prejudice or discrimination has or has not affected them. And the starting point for any conversation that is going to make things better is, first of all, being honest about acknowledging everyone's experience and not trying to change anyone else's experience.
Or do you mean tell them that they're wrong or something? No, that wasn't right. You know, you're overreacting.
Well, no, that's not the experience you've had.
Yeah. That's
no one's going to be ready to be part of the conversation if their voice is being
silenced,
quashed in some way.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't feel personally like I've had, that I'm aware of, particularly a lots of times where I've been discriminated against as a woman, but maybe I have and I don't know. Yeah,
me too. I feel the same way, actually. Yeah.
But I know that there are probably many people that have, and they are aware of it, and that has happened to them, and it's been active and it's been intentional, whatever the case may be. So knowing that there's just so much diversity of experience that is not the same as our own experience, I think is the first thing. And having then not just dwelling, as you've been kind of moving us forward in this conversation today, not just dwelling on all of the shortcomings or all of the problems, but rather saying, well, where are we at now? What can we celebrate about where everybody is right now, which comes back to that idea of valuing each other and valuing each person for the individual that they are. And then thinking about, okay, well, if there are systemic problems or if there are individual level problems about how can I challenge my own assumptions? How can I identify what those assumptions are? You know, if I'm being judgmental about someone else for whatever reason, what's my first step of becoming aware of that, and then my second step of choosing to take action to change that.
Yeah, fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And can I just, for people listening, I want to also say that Ingrid, Susan and I are well aware that we are from an Anglo-Celtic background, which automatically has some privilege attached to it. So we definitely can only speak on our own experiences, and do understand that for different nationalities in this country, especially the Indigenous community, this is 10,000 times the challenge. But today I wanted to talk about this in terms of, where are the girls? Can there be more girls stepping up, being more confident, and paving the way for other girls? Again, we can only really talk about girls as well. I mean, so look, thank you. I'm going to wrap this up here because, as you know, our conversations can go and go and go and go. We'll link whatever you guys, girls, whatever you girls want to link, we'll link it. We'll link to the MSO panel that was last night, which was a very interesting conversation. Anyone who hasn't seen Deborah Cheetham speak needs to see Deborah Cheetham speak. This is what we're talking. We're talking about a grace and a dignity in the face of absolute suffering in her past that you cannot imagine. And yet she talks about connection, love, repair. She is definitely a role model for all humanity in this continent. So that's it. Love you so much. Thank you so much for helping us understand more.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for having us.
When are we making music again? When are we
I don't know. That's up to you. It's up to you, isn't it?
Championing the most important female, performers, Britney Spears.
Oh, this is the jacket I wore for Toxic, arranged by Ed Fairley and played with Victorian Youth Symphony. It was one of the highlights of my life. I wore a white shirt underneath it, white boots, and snakeskin leggings, I believe. It was so much fun.
Britney. It was
this is the sort of thing Victorian Youth Symphony does, you see. Jurassic Park, Britney Spears. The programming is exceptional, so keep it up.
Who doesn't want to hear Toxic played on electric violin as a tango? I mean, really.
Exactly. Oh, I'm so blurry now. I'll do like a makeup tutorial. Okay. All right. Look, take care, and look, good luck with everything you do, and I so look forward to seeing you again in person and playing with you.
Sarah, can I just say one quick thing before you
Please.
sign off?
Yeah.
Can I just say you are an incredible role model to me and to everyone. I'm such a number one fan of you being yourself and the consistency in which you show up on the stage with MSO, as a solo performer, as a curator and a collaborator. It's consistent in its authenticity. I never come across you and you're somebody else and I'm like, what's wrong with Sarah? And that's it's exceptional, and it's a real inspiration, and thank you for all that you are doing to champion work for everybody else too, because you're an incredible leader. So thank you.
Thank you for noticing that. I can't be anyone else. I have tried. It's impossible.
And it's not very fun either.
No, it hurts. Let that be a lesson to everyone out there. Be yourselves. Okay. Signing off. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.